Welcome everybody to the next episode of the Impact Policy Podcast. Before we kick off, I want to take a moment to acknowledge country. We're here on, would you say we're on Bidjigal country in Coogee? Because sometimes people talk about it bordering Gadigal country.
Yeah, I think Bidjigal.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I think it's still Bidjigal. Yeah.
Well, let's take a moment to acknowledge that we're on country, pay our deepest respects to our elders past and present, and recognise that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land and that it was never ceded by treaty. Wherever you're watching or listening to this podcast from, recognise that you're on Aboriginal land, and let's take a moment to extend our deepest respects to the countries on which you're consuming this content today as well. So really stoked to be joined today by Kobie D, Kobie Duncan, the Gomeroi assassin, Australia's answer to J. Cole, and my first podcast experience was actually on his podcast series, No Role Models. So it's been a couple of years since that journey, and
Is that your first podcast?
that was my first one, bro.
True.
So you really sort of, I guess, lit the fire a bit, thinking, oh, maybe I can do something like this too. So
Yeah, sick.
so excited to have him on the series. So much of a depth of things that I think we're going to be able to talk about that people will get a lot from. But before I go any further, for anyone that's listening or watching along, I might just give you a moment, Brad, to introduce yourself, give a bit of a background about who you are, and everything in between.
Yeah, so my name is Kobie D, or Kobie Duncan. I'm a Gomeroi Wadi man. My father is Gomeroi from Moree, and my mum is Wadi Port Kembla.
Can you turn it down a little bit, baby? For anyone listening along, we'll probably talk about parenting and fatherhood as part of this podcast, and we're very much living that here as well, as we're joined by my youngest, Yindi Amara, sitting here on the couch with us as well. But I just asked her to turn Bluey down. I'm sure many people can relate. You were telling us who's your mob and where your family's from?
Yeah, so my father's Gomeroi, my mum's Wadi. But I grew up here in the southeast of Sydney on Bidjigal country.
Yeah, mad. And how would you describe like what you do with yourself, the impact, and focus that you put your energy into and all that sort of stuff?
So yeah, I'm a rapper, artist. I'd say community worker, like I try to do as much as I can with community work and stuff, because I think that's always been what I've wanted to do, outside of music. So yeah, I think music just gives me the platform to be able to do that on a bigger scale, so I definitely say that. And yeah, I guess still figuring out what I want to do too, outside of music as well.
Absolutely. Well, in the short space of time that you've been blazing trails across all those sorts of scenes, the community impact that you've had, particularly across southeast Sydney, but even across a lot of our regional communities, has been profound. So if this is the impact you're having now while you're still working it out, I think that's a taste for things to come, in terms of where we're going. So so excited to have you here and to yarn a little bit more about that sort of stuff as well.
I appreciate it, Buzz.
I was thinking maybe a good place for us to get going is, anyone that's listening or watching this that's not familiar with who you are, wouldn't take a minute to get up to date with what you're doing now online. You've got a very active online presence. People can follow along and engage with you across a range of different platforms. But the journey to get there wasn't straightforward. It wasn't a straightforward rise to success. And so maybe I thought we could take back and start, because I know you're a massive advocate around healing, around culture, around mental health and well-being. And maybe we could take a moment to explore what some of that journey has been like for yourself, because I know it always hasn't been straightforward. For people listening, me and Kobie, our I guess families live blocks away from each other. So from same communities, same sort of worlds. I've had the privilege of seeing you grow up in a lot of ways. But maybe you could take us through some of, I guess, those early stage sort of journeys around that sort of stuff, because I know you're quite passionate and vocal about it too.
Yeah, so I guess my story starts and still is out here in the southeast, Lexo, Duffy's, where I grew up. And, for me, I grew up with a single mum. I grew up, knowing I was Gomeroi, knowing I was a blackfella, all these things, but I didn't have, like my father there to teach me that stuff, you know, and there was a lot of stuff my mum didn't know either, you know. So for me, it was always, I was fortunate enough to grow up here in this area, you know, because going out to Gajaga and going to Soldier Settlement and having Auntie Kalita and people like that, Uncle Dean, still very much involved in so much culture and dancing and all that kind of stuff. But for me, there was always that sense of like, I know I'm Gomeroi, and like I want to know what that means, you know. I want to know my dances. I want to know my language. I want to know all these things, because for me it was like growing up with, you know, my brothers out here that are from here, that are Bidjigal, and you know, their families are from here, and there was so much history and so much that they could, you know, like identify with, you know. And for me it was like, I always wondered what that was like, you know. And you know, I got my cousins down here and stuff from my mum and stuff, but I knew it was different, you know. And you know, my dad, I stopped seeing my dad when I was probably, I think, like 5 or 6. And I met him again when I was about 14. And when I met him again, it was kind of like, 14 was just at a point in my life where I was figuring stuff out as well, you know. And it was just a weird time in my life, you know. Like, I'd met him again, and it was kind of like, I was already at a point of, you know, I hadn't heard from him for so long, and kind of making up my own, I guess, you know, come to terms with who I thought he was, you know. And but now we got the chance to meet him, you know, and it was like, now we got the chance to meet my family up there again and reconnect and all this stuff. And it was fun, you know. It was like, I get there and like, I'm meeting cousins like every day, you know, like so many cousins, and it's stuff that I seen down here, you know, that like I used to think, like, wonder what that would have been like, you know.
Yeah, totally.
So it was different, you know. So like, and when I think back to that, I realized there was a lot of, like, for me, of that finding myself and like always just wanting to connect somewhere. And I did find that when I went back there, but it was in different ways, you know. And I was still, I guess it wasn't cultural stuff. It was more just meeting family and stuff like that. So yeah, around that period, I was like experimenting with, you know, drinking and drugs and smoking and all these different things that we do as teenagers, you know. And I think meeting my dad again and reconnecting up there was parts where I thought that it would like kind of fill in places that were missing for me, and it just didn't really, you know. Like I still didn't have that strong connection with my dad. I don't know if it was just we hadn't seen each other for so long, or just it just wasn't as what I thought it would be, you know. But I bounced back and forth. I'd go back up to Moree still, and I'd still spend time up there with my nan and pop and my cousins. I became very close with my cousins, and but there was still, I was just at that time in my life where I was still trying to fill a void that I just didn't know what it was, you know. And I was still trying to figure out what that was, you know. And being, I guess, a young black man at that, like growing up with a single mother, there was a lot of things that I was like, you know, finding my way as a man, you know, finding my way as a young man in this world. And for me, it was following what a lot of the older boys were doing, you know, and it was following like what my older cousins were doing. And, you know, same with Moree, same with down here. It was like, those were the people we looked up to, you know. And as a young man, that was what you know, that's where I gravitated towards, is like following what was going on. And that quickly became, you know, like I just fell in love with drugs, and I fell in love with drinking and partying, and same with a lot of like my friends, you know. We're all doing the same thing and just following what we thought was normal, you know. And it quickly turned into an addiction, you know. Before I even realized it was an addiction, you know.
Absolutely.
And it turned into something where I'd all through high school, it was like, you know, I'd through the week I'd be smoking yanni. I was going to school smashed. You know, like I'd bring my stuff to school and I'd smoke at school. You know, it was like just an everyday thing. And the weekends were just, you know, I started getting into pingers and you know, coke and like all these things. For me, it was like I'd look forward to the weekend because that's what we're doing, you know. And it got to a point where it got quite out of hand, you know. And when I was about 16, I had like a kind of near overdose. You know, I took way too much. So I had ended up. I went home and I had to get my mum to take me to the hospital because it was just a bit too much for me, you know. And I think that was my first really big scare, you know, with drugs, and thinking like where that could have took me. Because I'd had friends at that age. I was about 16, so I'd had friends at that age already that had lost their mind to drugs. And, you know, and seeing a lot of older people in the community that had lost their mind to drugs, that completely just changed. You know, uncles that you know from when you're younger, and then like now you're older and they're not the same anymore, you know. So for me, it was like that big fear of like, fuck, is this, am I going to go down that same road, you know? And I think that was my first moment of thinking of the impact I have on my younger siblings, because it was like, I remember being in that state and my little brother and sister were in the house, you know, and I remember thinking like, is this what I want them to see their older brother as? You know, do I want them to see their older brother like this? And that was a big reason for me changing at that point, you know, like that's where I started boxing, and I started, you know, like being, trying to be healthy, and, you know, like I started fighting, and I had about 16 fights in that period. And, you know, that was my life at the time as well. You know, like that's where I started putting all my energy in. But with that still came the partying, you know, like I was never ever thought about sobriety, or never thought of like, I'm never going to do that stuff again. It's like, I'm just going to do something positive still, but I'm still going to do that stuff. But the boxing, you know, slowed it down. But, you know, you win a fight, you're straight out on the drink, and you're on a bender straight away. So with that, it just went hand in hand, you know? So yeah, it was like, even though I was fit and I was healthy, I was still like smoking cigarettes the whole time I was boxing. I was at the start, I was still smoking Yandi. So it was like I never really stepped away from that life, but I knew that I wanted to do something different for the impact that I was having on my younger siblings. And yeah, I took that as far as I could, you know, for a few years, and I was doing good. Like, you know, I was excelling. Like, you know, it was like
a few titles. You're doing really well.
Yeah. I won two state titles. I won a featherweight, and I moved up and I won a lightweight title. And you know, I loved it. And it wasn't until I started rapping again, that's when I was like, you know, I recorded Jody, I recorded This Life, and those songs, once I put them out, I was like, all right, like I could actually make a career out of this, you know, like, because rapping's always been my first passion, first and foremost, you know. And then once I seen that, I was like, well, this is the route that I want to follow. And once I did that, it was like there was no more slowing down to prepare for fights anymore, you know. It was like I could just drink when I wanted to, I could do drugs when I wanted to, I could do all that, you know. And it was like, it went hand in hand with the, I guess, rapper lifestyle, you know. And I fell into that, and yeah, it was like that it just quickly got out of hand again, you know. And once that started getting, like, I guess at the same time that I started putting music out and getting a bit of a name for myself, I found out I was going to become a father. And with that came its own, you know, fears and anxieties and traumas and triggers and, you know, all of that comes with it that I never knew, you know, like no one ever told me that was what was going to happen. Things were going to get brought up, or, you know, like no one asked me if are you ready to be a dad? No one asked me like, how do you feel about being a dad? Like all these different things. It's like, I think, you know, I think we're so used to just like, oh, congratulations, you know, and like, oh, we're just like, oh, like you must be happy like this. But no one's like, oh, how do you feel, like, you know, like. Totally. So it was like, and I was young, you know, I was only 21 at the time, and it just all got a bit too much for me. And when my daughter was born, I thought that would be the turning point for me, but it wasn't. You know, it was like a lot of addictions, it's you think you can stop until you try to stop, and it was like I was too far gone. So yeah, that's the point where I signed myself into a rehab, and yeah, things really changed for me after that.
Before you get to that that rehab journey and that sort of stuff, just listening to you reflect on that experience as a young person, you know, and all them challenges around, you know, that relationship with your dad and just connection and belonging generally as well, and then the other challenges that come with, you know, navigating addiction and just the reality of what it's like growing up in the communities like where we've grown up, when you're coming from, you know, a home that might be full of love but not full of a lot of resources and role models around you. You know, we've seen a lot of like issues in our communities with stuff like youth suicide, mental health. I know you've lost friends to suicide. I have as well. And other mental health stuff, you know, like you talked about when people sort of, you know, develop different conditions and stuff like that as a result of these traumas. But, you know, do you ever sort of reflect on, I guess, that the issue of youth suicide being so closely connected to it and having a lived experience personally and in community that I guess understands the world that so many of us are growing up in? I'd just love to just listen to you, like, you know, I'd just love to maybe hear some of your reflections on youth suicide generally and what you think we maybe need to be thinking about in terms of how to understand it and how to look at it. I know it's a tough one too because it's close to home, you know, but
it's a big one because it's always like every time it happens we have these conversations, you know, and we think like, well, I think definitely like all the time, like, what can we do better? Because it's always like, oh, speak up, you know, like we always, speaking up is a massive part of it, but we know like how hard that is, because when you're in that moment, it's like, it's not about not wanting to speak up. It's just about like not, I guess, for me, whenever I've felt like that, it's like, not knowing how to speak to someone about it. And sometimes it's not wanting to speak to someone about it, you know, because sometimes you feel like you're not going to be understood. Yeah. Sometimes you just feel like no one just understands what you're going through, or sometimes you just don't want people to just sugarcoat things and tell you things are going to be better, you know, it's just sometimes you just don't know, you know. And for me, it's like, whenever I was feeling like that, because I had lost so many friends to suicide, it's like I knew that's what I never wanted to do, but I still felt like that. You know, I still felt like I didn't want to be here. I still felt there was definitely times when I felt like I was better off not being on this earth, you know. And a lot of those times I took myself to hospital. You know, I took myself. I reached out, and my mum was always my person that I'd tell, like, when I was going through that, or, you know, my people at Weave, you know, like there was so many times when I told them when I was going through that stuff, you know, and it was hard to even like, I just knew once I told someone, that they were going to be there, you know, and even though that I didn't feel like talking, like I just knew that if I reached out to someone and at least just told them where, like, I knew I'd, you know, like at least be helped to go to hospital or something like that. And for me, it was like I just needed a place to go where I guess I knew people were going to be there, but I didn't want to speak to anyone.
Yeah.
You know, so like for me, it was like I'd go to these places and I just wanted to know people were there, you know, and because for me, it wasn't home. I couldn't be at home because I had younger siblings and I had, you know, I didn't want my mum to see me like that. I didn't want, you know, it was like I just wanted to be in a place where I knew I was going to be safe, you know, and for me, it was like I'd be in those places and then they'd say like 3 days later, all right, like you can go home now. And it was like, then I'd be right back out and back in the same thing, you know, and I'd be back there in a few weeks. And it's the same with so many, like for me, I always think like we need places that, you know, when young people are feeling like that, to feel safe that they can come into and they can spend as long as they need to there. And there's the right, you know, people there to, you know, like whether it's people like us, you know, like that can be there to speak to them and, you know, help them through that time. Because for me, it was just always just wanting that safe place, you know, wanting that place where I could, I felt safe, you know. It's like, it's a hard, because it's different for everyone.
Absolutely.
You know? It's different. Like for me, I think for some of my friends, the big thing was addiction as well. Is you know, like they've masked how they're feeling for so long, and like for like one of my good mates, you know, like I never ever would have thought that he would have done something like that, because he's, even when we were on it, you know, I'd speak about me being depressed, and I'd speak about me feeling like that, and I'd ask him, I'm like, do you ever feel like that? And he'd be like, nah. Just kind of, you know. And so when it happened, it was just like such a shock, you know, for me. Like, even though I've lost so many friends, it was like, you just never know. You never know, because people are different. People need different things, you know. And so, yeah, it is a tough one, like, but I guess, yeah, it comes with having these conversations, and it comes with, I guess, action, you know, trying out things, you know, at least, you know. I think it's like having conversations with, you know, people that like open these facilities and open these places, is like speaking with young people and stuff. And what do young people feel like they need when they're in those states, when they're in those, when they're feeling vulnerable, when they're feeling, you know, these kind of feelings. It's like speaking and seeing what the young people want.
I feel like you touch on some really important points there, though, because, like, you know, big thing about this podcast is, like, a lot of people listen to this stuff that, like, they're change makers, or they're allies, or they're working in, you know, community development, social policy, or they're just general community that listen to this stuff too. And I think you talk about a couple of really important points. You know, one of them is about accessibility of services and spaces. Like, you know, you talk about being able to access a place and a space that feels safe, that isn't clinical, or doesn't necessarily, you know, you don't necessarily have to feel like you have to be talking about everything that's going on for you, but that you can come and feel a sense of connection and safety, maybe in a time of crisis for yourself. You know, even that other stuff there you're talking about in terms of, I remember there was a youth suicide in our community a number of years ago now, and there was a massive community meeting down at the old bowling club down near Maroubra Beach, and it was like hundreds of people there, young people, you know, broader community, everything.
Yeah, I remember that.
You remember that? Yeah. And but I remember like hearing the young people going like literally saying like we need to be talking about like drugs, like we need to stop, not stop. You know, probably grossly misquoting it, but it was like, we can't talk about these as separate things. They're interconnected. You know, we can't talk about people taking their own lives without talking about the issues around addiction. And maybe that might have been specific to that experience, or maybe not. But I think you raise a really important point of like, how do we start to understand the interconnection of these sorts of things as well? So I think you raise some really good points around like how services can be designed and be more accessible for everyone, particularly for mob. How we understand thinking about mental health and youth suicide more broadly, as opposed to not just thinking about it as like an isolated incidence of depression alone or something like that. That, you know, there's often the presence of alcohol and drugs and stuff like that in those circumstances. And also, brother, I think for anyone that's listening, and I think, you know, we know the stats around mental health generally is that the reality is that, you know, many people have struggled at different times in their life, and if you're listening to this right now and you're struggling, or you have struggled in the past, or maybe you're on your own healing journey, is that you might not reach out and feel comfortable to reach out and ask for support straight away, and that might be okay, but not to feel like you can't look for opportunities to try and get that support. I think what I'm trying to say when I try and communicate that is when you talked about that, when you talked about going to Weave or going to your mum and stuff like that, were there points in time where you wanted to, but you like, was it a process? Like, what was it like the first time you had to tell your mum or you had to tell someone at Weave?
Mm.
Like for someone listening that's like they might be feeling like that and they've never opened their mouth about it. Like how hard is that first conversation?
It was for me, I first reached out to like I think my first real reaching out to someone outside of like my mum was Kat from Weave, you know, and I think it was when I really started realizing that I can't do this on my own, you know, and to be able to reach out to someone and because I felt like everyone had this view of me, you know, especially Weave, you know, like that, because I've been such an advocate for so much things, and I thought people were going to look at me different, you know, and I thought people were going to, you know, it was like, I was scared of how people were going to view me now, you know, I was worried about letting people down. I was worried about, you know, showing that side of me that I try to shelter from other people, you know, especially like people that I look up to, you know. So for me, that first moment of opening up about that, like it was a massive moment, you know, and I was definitely worried because I didn't know where it was going to lead.
1 minute.
You know, I didn't know, I guess I was scared of taking that next step, you know, but I knew I had to tell someone, you know, I knew I had to at least like see if there was like another way, like a suggestion or anything like that, you know. And yeah, once I did, you know, and it took a lot, you know, once I opened up, then I started speaking to, you know, like more people and, you know, Charlotte, Marty, and once they really knew the severity of it, you know, because I was very good at hiding it, you know, like not a lot of people knew besides like my mates that I was doing the stuff with, you know, and, you know, but even like I was at that stage, I was hanging with different mate groups and like, you know, so even like my friends that I grew up with, you know, didn't even know the severity of stuff that I was doing and, you know, like the different stuff I was dabbling in and, you know, the places I was hanging, you know, like a lot of people just didn't know because I knew not to, I didn't want people to see that side, you know, and
Totally.
so to open up to people like Charlotte and Marty and Kat, it was like, for me, it was a big moment because I didn't ever want anyone to see me in that light, you know. I didn't want people to see, I wasn't as vulnerable like as I am now to speak about this stuff, you know. At that time, it was I'd only ever speak about it in my music. My music was my escape. My music was my way to express myself and what I was going through. But I would never sit here and speak to someone like this about it, you know. And so when I opened up, for them to see, you know, the severity of it and what I was really going through, it was just after that they was just every day like trying to get me to a detox and try to get me into rehab and to take that step. And if I didn't have them to help me to do that and really like, you know, not push me but really check in on me every day, like, are you ready to go? It was never like there was kind of a time when we jumped in the car and they took me there and like they're like, you're going now, and I was just like, I'm not going. So but they never like forced me like, you have to do this, you know. It was just always, are you ready now? Like, are you ready now? Every day it's like, are you like, because for them it was like, you know, I'd call them when I was like at my lowest of lows and like, you know, I'd been up for days, and for them, I can imagine how scary it would have been, you know, like not knowing if I was, you know, gonna, you know, die at some point, you know. Even for my mum, like, you know, my mum had seen me in so many like positions where she just didn't know if I was gonna come home, you know, or she didn't know, you know, like she'd taken me to the hospital and sometimes they'd try to turn me away because they'd say it's just drug induced, you know. And my mum like breaking down, like crying, saying like my son is saying that he doesn't want to be here and he's gonna harm himself and you're gonna just turn him away, you know. And like So it was hard for everyone at that point. So like, I didn't want people to see me in that light, but once I come out and I started speaking about it, like people were like, all right, something needs to be done now, you know? And so it was really come down to having the right support around me, because if I didn't have that, I wouldn't have made that step to go to detox.
I think the saddest part, listening to that part of your story, and is what you reflected on with your friend that you lost, because you talked about the hardest part of you seeking support. In 1 minute, I'll just finish this quick yarn, baby. You've been so patient. Is you talked about the hardest part about you seeking support was this perception of yourself. Nobody had any idea that you were unwell, and how hard it was to reach out and have that conversation. Yeah, my girl. Of course you can. Ask Uncle Kenny. He might give you a texter. It was about like that hardest first step was people had a perception of you. No one knew you were so unwell. And you felt this pressure on yourself to maintain this facade. You were doing all this youth advocacy stuff, which was amazing. On top of these demons, you were fighting behind closed doors. And you know, I listened to that and reflect on you talking about your mate and about how you would ask him and he just said, no, everything's fine, and you had no idea. You know, and I just think for people listening, like how many people must be showing up like you were, maintaining that facade, or like your friend presenting, you know, as if they had no problems, but not having somewhere to be able to go and to get that support. And so I think like the stuff that you talk about, you know, is we know that there's such a massive gap with mental health services for young people in terms of being able to be responsive. And I think you touched like what your journey and experience has been like in terms of getting that support. You know, I just wish we could have that as more accessible for the whole community. I think about like, you know, imagine if your friend had a space where he was connected to people that he could feel safe to have done that vulnerable thing that you did with Kat that first time, which very much was the catapult, you know, to that journey, and stuff like that too. But I think you know, it just reinforces how critical this sort of stuff is, you know, and these services are for all young fellas as well. Anything you want to say in response to any of those sorts of thoughts, or do you see, when you think about mental health now, more like we know that healing's a journey, right? Our mental well-being is an ongoing journey, you know, we all, for health and well-being. And, you know, some time has gone since that sort of stuff, and you're very vocal in this sort of space, but do you see these sorts of services increasing, or like, do you feel like that we need to have more services like Weave across, you know, communities across Southeast Sydney and, you know, Moree and all across the space? Have you seen it change since that part of the start of your journey to now, or do you feel like it's the same?
I feel like it's the same. For me anyway, like I feel like there still needs to be so much. Like there needs to be Weaves everywhere, you know, like there needs to be so much more funding put into places like Weave, because like you see the impacts that they have on communities, you know. And for me, it was like I was doing that advocacy stuff, and it was like, for me, it's because I grew up, you know, a part of that, you know, and I wanted to be a part of that, you know, because I know how much that meant to me, and I knew how much Weave meant to me. So I wanted to be a part of that, you know, and I wanted to, you know, the youth workers and stuff that I had in my life through Weave were my role models that made me want to do that for other younger people, you know, and being exposed to those kinds of things, you know, like I think to have that for young people to be involved in safe spaces that, you know, like Weave, that inspire to that shows hope and stuff like that, you know, for me was so massive in me feeling safe enough to reach out, you know, to people like Charlotte and Marty and Kat. And so, yeah, for me, I think it's, I've always just thought there needs to be more. There needs to be more places like Weave. So yeah, to just to answer your question, yeah, I feel like it's pretty much the same. There's definitely more conversations. I definitely feel like there's more being talked about. I think I think people are talking more. I just think there needs to be a bit more action.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. I think the stigma is shifting a bit in terms of how we start to talk and have conversations about mental health. I think you're right. And I think now we're at that point of how do we translate that sort of stuff into action. And, you know, like I said at the start, people listening to this, like we've known each other for a long time. And it's funny when you talk about this stuff, I reflect on like how I knew you in those different points of time in your life and that. And, you know, when you might have been dealing with mental health and suicide and stuff like that. And one of your most, I don't know if it's one of your most or whatever, but your song Jody that you wrote, is that one of your most successful sort of tracks you've released?
Yeah, it just went gold.
Yeah. Just went gold. Yeah, I just dropped that. But the thing I love about a lot of your music is I remember the first time I heard them. So there's a couple of tracks that I remember the first time I heard them, Still Standing. You know, I remember crying the first time I heard it when you talk about kids being like how they stole that baby from the mother, because I know what that felt like, you know, having a lived experience of that. I remember sitting in the car and like viscerally like crying. And then when I first heard Jody, and I think you performed at that youth event, I think Kid Leroy was there for that one as well.
Yeah, Mad Pride.
Yeah, and it was maybe one of the first times you dropped it and you performed it. And I remember just like time stopped as I heard it and listened to it. And then, you know, and then the final bit, you know, when you talk about him passing away at the end, and I just remember thinking like I just felt like it, from someone who's grown up in the struggle and in community, it just like felt like it was just hitting everything that I'd ever grown up around and seen, whether directly or indirectly, you know? And it's interesting because I imagine that, like you said, when you wrote that song, that was around the time where, you know, you were struggling with a lot of sort of stuff. And I know like Dr. Chelsea Watergo, she quoted Jody in her book, Another Day in the Colony. And she really describes the intersection of that experience in her book. And she sort of says that you sing of the peace found in death for us as blackfellas. She says that your song for your cousin Jody, who's shot during an armed robbery, sounds much like the sorrow songs of slaves that Du Bois speaks of. Such songs, she states, they grope towards some unseen power and sign of rest in the end. And when I read that sort of, I guess, analysis by Dr. Chelsea of that experience, you know, I think that just sort of really reinforced for me the power of your ability to communicate the lived experience of what it's like to grow up being black in our communities, in urban Sydney City, Southeast Sydney communities, the complexity of what that's like, interconnected with, you know, poverty, discrimination, social disadvantage, coupled with everything else. And I feel like, you know, the growth projecting from there almost was like continued, like your music continued to stack on top of that, you know, as more and more tracks came out and compounded, you know, those stories. But I sort of talk to that because this yarn that we've had just makes me think about like how hard was it to write a song like that given where you were at that point in your life?
So I'd like to say I thought about all of that when I wrote it, you know, but for me, I was just a 19-year-old kid. Like I was 18, 19, and I was just writing a story that I wanted to write a story of real events of people that I've, like, not saying that it's a real story, but like stuff that's really real for us. That
absolutely.
for a lot of people, especially people that, you know, make decisions in our communities and for our people and for all these, make decisions like for our communities that never have been in our communities, that never even seen the stuff that goes on in our communities. For me, it was like wanting to paint that picture of the real stuff that we see, the real stuff that we grow up with, the real stuff, you know. And for me, it was like when I speak about, you know, Jody dying at the end and us just being happy that he just made it out. You know, for me, it was like I was just a young kid that didn't see anything past my teenage years, you know, because of the stuff I was going through at that point in my life, you know. And I know how it feels to get to a point where you'd just rather be dead, you know. And for me, it was it just come from a place of, you know, and Jody's like only a young kid, you know, and it was just not seeing past teenage years, you know. And that's really what it was for me, is like I was at a point in my life where I just couldn't see past where I'm at now, you know. But I knew I wanted to tell my stories, and I knew I wanted to tell our stories, and that was really where the inspiration come for that. You know, I was doing shows with Just Reinvest, and I was only since I was like 14, you know, and at a young age, and being in rooms and performing for people in suits and you know, politicians and stuff like that, and realizing that, all right, I have a platform in these spaces to speak about real shit, you know, speak about stuff that these people know nothing about, you
Absolutely.
know, because I was talking about my cousins going to jail. I was talking about, you know, growing up in Lexa. I was talking about these things at 14, you know, and I'd have people in suits come up to me and like ask me about my story and ask me stuff that made me realize that, all right, I can say stuff, you know, I can get a message across to these people and, you know, let them know how it is for us, you know. And that was really the inspiration of Jody for me, was taking people on a journey through a story of 3 young boys that you would probably see on the news of robbing some place and one gets shot, and then people, you know, like in nowadays would be commenting, oh, what were they doing robbing the bank? Like, what was they doing with guns? What was they doing? You know, he shouldn't have been doing this, you know. And then it's like so easy for people these days to do that when they see a news headline of like a young person like doing something, stabbing or anything like that, you know. For me, it was like, all right, I want to take you to show you where these kids come from. And, you know, I want to show you the kind of life these kids have lived, you know, to end up in that position where he does get shot, you know, because 9 times out of 10, like in those situations, if you did sit there and you showed people like someone's whole backstory, like then they start to understand, you know, like, because it's so easy to just kind of just judge someone straight away from a news headline or seeing someone in jail, or, you know, to be like, well, you shouldn't have been doing that, you know. It's like there's always a backstory. Like everyone's got a story, everyone's got, you know, their struggles, and everyone's got their reasons for what they do. And sometimes you can't blame people for the mentality that they have, whether it's to get money or whether it's using drugs, or it's, you know, like these things is most of it's survival instincts.
Absolutely.
You know? It's growing up
Absolutely
from same situations as, you know, those 3 boys. So for me, it was, painting that picture and bringing people, I guess, into our communities.
Totally. So I guess in terms of timeline, you probably went from there, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but did you write Still Standing while you were in rehab?
Yeah, I finished it. I wrote the first half not long after I wrote Jody.
Yep.
And I just had the first half for a while, and then when I went to rehab a few years later, I was part of like a men's healing group with Uncle Ivan, and I forget the other uncle's name, but we did like a 3-day thing, and he actually said the line. He said, you know, our jails are full. Our classrooms are empty, but our jails are full. And for me, I was like, that's powerful right there, you know, like that line. And I wrote it down on my phone quickly, and I went back to my room in rehab, and I finished the whole second verse, you know,
Yeah, wow.
off of just being inspired by that. And because the first verse I thought was so strong, and I just didn't, I wanted the second verse to be just as strong. So I had left it for so long because I wanted it to be strong, you know, and
Totally.
I was just inspired in that moment.
Absolutely. Before we, yeah, I mean, fuck, I could, it's, bro, I often just think about how powerful some of your tracks are just in terms of strength for, just in terms of strength, you know, in terms of knowledge for people to understand and hear, and just in terms of, you know, entertainment as well. But like, can you take us back to, so we sort of, I sort of jumped in when you were on your journey to probably going to rehab. And can you take us to what that experience was like? Because it was did you just have one experience in rehab, or did you have multiple experiences? So I know you went to the Glen.
Yeah,
and that was a great experience.
I've only ever been to the Glen.
Only ever been to the Glen. So can you, for people listening, maybe just share what that journey was like? I know one of the biggest things is that we don't have enough places like the Glen across the country and stuff like that. But yeah, can you share a little bit about that journey?
Yeah, so coming back to opening up, you know, because it all happened pretty quick for me. It was like I opened up and then I was in detox like 3 weeks later, you know. So I think that was the biggest scary moment for me is going to rehab, because there was the first part of admitting that I have a problem, and then admitting it to someone else that I have a problem, and then going to a place that really says I've got a problem, you know, and really feeling like I guess there's that part of you that feels like, can I really not do this on my own? You know, like, and then kind of feeling like, is there something wrong with me? You know, like, or like, I don't know, not feeling like I need to be in a place like rehab, you know, like
Totally.
But also just being scared of not knowing what rehab's going to be like, you know, not knowing a life different than the life that I've always lived, a life that was always normal, you know. Drugs and alcohol were always normal before I even did drugs and alcohol, you know. So to think of I'm going to a place where, you know, to see a different life is like, that's daunting in itself, you know. But for me, it was once I actually decided, like, all right, I'm ready, and I told Marty and Charlotte and stuff, like, all right, I'm ready to go to detox, because I was just at the lowest point, you know. It was just like such a dark time for me, and it took a few attempts, you know. Like I said, like they took me to a detox, like they literally drove me out the front of it, and I just said I'm not going in, just because I was just scared. It was like I'm just not ready. I'm not ready for that, even though I kept saying I was, you know. But eventually I did. I made that step, and you know, a big thing was that my daughter, she was about 3 or 4 months at the time. So for me, it was like, I have to do this. Like I know that I have to do it, you know, and I was only getting worse, you know, so I wasn't easing up. I wasn't, you know, as much as I kept saying I want to stop, I just couldn't stop, you know, and I didn't want my daughter to remember this part of my life. So that was a big motivation for me to finally say, I'm gonna go, like I'm ready. And I remember that first week in detox. For me, it was like, I think that was one of the hardest, that first week, because I was like, all right, I'm actually doing this, you know. And you know, throughout the week, I knew how much I wanted this as well. I wanted to stop, and I wanted to do a life without drugs and alcohol. And so I really paid attention to everything that was going on in there. You know, the counselors that would come speak to us, and you know, the different just activities and stuff that we're doing. I just really paid attention, because I'm like, all right, I want this to be my only stint in here. I don't want to have to come back here, you know? And I remember the first week and then thinking like, oh, maybe I can just go home. Like I've done pretty good this week, you know?
Yeah.
And I ended up
detox.
Yeah, in detox. And I was at Marie Boucher detox.
Yeah.
So it was brand new, you know, everything's new. Like it was nice. Like I loved it in there. And then I had to go to Concord after that. That was like it was very different. And then I was like, all right, yeah, I'm ready to go home. But the Glen is such a big waiting list, you know, and that's another thing is like I think like, I don't know if it might be saying crazy numbers, but it's like 500 people waiting list, like all the time, you know? So people are always trying to get into the Glen, but there's just such a high demand, you know? And so for me, it was like, I'm ready to go, but like there's such a high waiting list, and I just didn't know how long I had, you know? And so I stayed in Concord for like longer than usually you only stay in detox for 1 week and then you come out and you wait to go back into rehab or wait to go into rehab. But I went straight from Marie Boucher to Concord and I stayed as long as I could until I could go into rehab, because I knew I just couldn't trust myself being out here.
Totally.
And, you know, I would have been straight back to the same stuff. As soon as I get that go in me, I'm like, I'm feeling all right. Like, you know, I probably go have a drink or something, you know, and I knew I couldn't go back to that. So, yeah, I got the call that I got a bed for the Glen, and again, that was like another moment of like, fuck, am I making the right steps? Like, is this like, what's this going to be like? And, you know, but I think being in Concord as well, we had like AA meetings and we had NA meetings, my first ever time being in meetings, and hearing other people speak about their stories and the stuff that they're going through. And, you know, like for me, it was like, all right, I'm with people that are on the same journey as me, you know, but at the same time, still, I was in that Concord with people that were not serious about it. People that were, you know, like trying to, you know, dodge going to jail or stuff like that. So it was hard as well, because I've got friends there now, you know, but they're like speaking about drugs and they're speaking about getting on it and that. This, when I get out, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And for me, I was like, I'm taking this shit serious, you know, like this is do or die for me, you know, like I need to do this. So it was hard for me as well. But then to hear people's stories and stuff, you know, it was, I think for me, because I was the youngest person in the room, I was like, I was 21, you know, and I'm in the room with like people that, you know, are much older than me as well. Like I think there was one other guy that was like just a bit older than me, who was the closest to me. But hearing their stories and just hearing how many times they've been to rehab and how many times they've been to this, like, for me, it was like, all right, yeah, I don't want this to be like where I'm at that point in my life where I'm like, I wish I did this now, you know? So once I got to the Glen, it was, you know, like I think I realized like, all right, a lot in my life has to change now, you know, and that's like when I come home, when I come back to the area, like things have to change, you know. I know that, and I started kind of putting those things into place before I even got to the Glen, because I knew I wanted to do as much as I could to, you know, like, and I just wanted to be serious about this. And once I was on my way to the Glen and I arrived there, literally like my first day, like I just got there, and I'm being like, done the question stuff, and they're like inducting me, I guess, like whatever you call it. And Ethan, this is like one of my good mates to this day. He was a counsellor there at the time, like one of the workers at the Glen, had been through the Glen before himself, come on and started working as a worker, a counsellor there. And so he's like talking to me and stuff, and then someone comes over and they're like, hey, are you Kobie D? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, we've got a bunch of like school kids here, and like they've all just noticed you. Like they were doing like a like tour around the Glen, and they're like, do you mind coming and getting some pictures with the kids?
First haven't even got through
and I'm
induction
like,
yet.
I look that rough, you know, like I've 2 weeks sober, and you know, haven't had a haircut, nothing, you know, like I was pale as anything, like. But I went up and I was like, I spoke to the kids and stuff, and I was like, because for me, I was like, all right, you know, like at least if they see me in a place like this, you know, like it might inspire one of them, you know, like so if they're ever going through it, you know, if Kobie D's in here, you know, like, and that was always a thing for me, is like, because I was worried about, you know, like my career, and I was worried about like, you know, my image and all these things before going in, you know, and it was like being in detox. I think that was my time of realizing like, you know what, like this is my chance to kind of to do this, but also like inspire other people to go on this journey, like if they need to, you know. And so yeah, that first day and took some photos with the kids and stuff, and it was, those first few weeks was hard as well, because there was no visits or anything in the first 3 weeks. You get no phone. But it was like being introduced to a new schedule as well, you know, like getting up, we had to make our beds every day. We had chores in the morning. Then we go off and do activities. Then in the afternoon, you got a meeting, and then you got a meeting first thing in the morning, like, and just getting in that routine was different for me as well. You know, I almost got kicked out for like not making my bed. That was like the main chore, but it was just something that, you know, like I was just used to just walking straight out of the house, and
totally,
you know, so for me it was like implementing those things, like, and just like, I guess, living a life outside of a life that I always thought was normal, was hard. And, you know, like, and then once I started getting to see my daughter, and having those visits, that was a big moment for me of realizing like, fuck, like I really need to do this, because I felt like I didn't know my daughter. You know, she was only like 4 or 5 months, you know, but I felt like I didn't know her, you know. And when I was doing drugs and I was still seeing her, but it wasn't like, you know, like I think back now, like I've got a 6-month-old son, you know, and I'm there every day, and I see every bit of change, and I see every bit of growth, and I see and it just like, it makes me think back to how much I did miss of my daughter. And at the time, I just like, once I started, you know, I had pictures of her all on my wall, and I just all this guilt. I think that was the hardest thing of those first 3 weeks, was all this guilt that I didn't know was coming. All the self-reflection that, and all right, maybe I was the problem here, like in certain, like my relationships, my friendships, my, you know, like my relationship with my mom, and you know, thinking like to where I did do wrong and to where I didn't see before. It was like, it was this moment of like, just that self-reflection of like, you know, I have done some bad things, or I have just been very selfish in a lot of moments because of my addiction, you know.
I imagine how many people out there that are struggling, you know, that you talked about guilt, and then having that space to be able to sit with it, you know, and understand all that sort of stuff. And that part of your journey, that part of you know, your experience with your daughter, and reflecting on those connections, like, you attribute that to being a big part of your healing journey?
Yeah, definitely. Like, I think while I was in addiction, there was just something that, for my daughter, it was just so much guilt. I was like, I just wasn't thinking of her in so much of that time of my life, you know. And even to just having her, you know, like I just wanted to be a dad so much, you know. And I was just like, I'm just really happy to be a dad. And, you know, like, I didn't think of the responsibility that goes into it. I didn't think of, you know, what she needed from me and for me to be. And it was such I think back now, is like, it was just me wanting to feel something in my own like life, you know, fill that void of like not having a dad, you know, and just wanting for myself, you know.
Totally.
And so all that self-reflection was like, all right, well, she's here now, like, what am I going to do now? You know, like, how do I be the dad that I know that I want to be, and the dad that I didn't have in my life, you know? And because for a long time I thought just showing up was enough, showing my face and you know, because that's what I wanted from my dad. I just at least wanted my dad to just show his face and just come take me out to a footy or something, you know, like. And for me, I thought that was going to be like, but yeah, so there was all that self-reflection and all that guilt that really, like, it was hard to deal with because, you know, I'm already feeling vulnerable enough with myself to then to feel all that. But being at the Glen and just like before, as I said, there was a lot of people that were a lot older than me in there, you know. One of my, like, best friends in there was, like, he's, like, over 50, you know, like, we, you know, like, and hearing, like, just all of their stories, all of them being fathers themselves.
Totally.
Of the same feeling that I was feeling of guilt and what their kids have been through. Even, like, someone saying to me, you know, like, you are very lucky you have the opportunity right now to change for your daughter before it's too late, before the damage is done, you know, and, like, that was massive for me, you know, and yeah, that was just a massive moment of, like, self-reflection of myself in addiction.
You can really see a lot of your healing journey through your music, hey? And that sort of journey, like, you look at that that track you done with Stan Walker, Father's Eyes, you know, and it's almost like a you hear some of your earlier tracks at the start of that journey, and it's almost like a full circle piece in a big part of your healing journey, because so much of that, even just hearing you talk about this sort of stuff now and reflecting on listening to that track, which I was listening to this morning, is so much of that insight that both you and Stan share as part of that process, you know. And I think, you know, like you talk about, like, you know, you were 21, but your father was even younger than that. Like one of you know, really like that whole insight into the realities of what those journeys were like. And I think it's such a powerful part of our growth and our healing journey when we can almost remove ourselves a little bit from what we needed to still understand what it was like. And I think that just, you know, it doesn't make it any easier, but it does help us understand. I think that track, you know, like, really, like, it's just so powerful, because I reckon so many men can hear that, whether they're dads or not, can really hear that and connect to that in terms of the power of that message in there. And so it's clear that this has been a big part of, you know, some of that turning point in your healing journey. And that might be a nice little segue to start to look at where you're at now in terms of what you're doing. We caught up a couple of weeks ago. You've got a studio now in your hometown, down in Lexo. Do you want to give us a bit of a background to that? I know you got a new EP dropping soon. Do you want to tell the world a little bit about what life looks like now?
Yeah, so got a studio right in Lexo, over in South Maroubra, and for me that's always been the dream, you know. And you know, with the blessings of you know, relationships and meeting, you know, people like Tag, who were like a big you know, like, I started doing workshops with Nakama Arts, which is through Tag, and you know, they built a studio over in Burke, and I was doing workshops over in Burke and then doing workshops in Moree, and you know, I spoke so much about wanting to do something in my community, and you know, they've been, you know, such a big blessing, you know, like of getting this studio open, and you know, we're in the final stages now, and it's pretty much ready to start doing workshop stuff. And for me, like, the biggest thing for me was having a space where young people can come in and learn to make music and can come in and express themselves, and not only just rap, you know, like, learn how to make beats, learn how to do DJ stuff, you know, podcast room where they can come in and have these yarns, you know, and start their own things, you know,
their own voices.
Because for me, like, growing up, you know, I loved my sports, always loved my sports, but there was a period where, you know, my music was everything to me. My music was what I used to escape. My music was what I used to, even to this day, speak about stuff that I before didn't feel comfortable speaking about just in a conversation. So for me, it was like, how did I not have any of those spaces in my community? You know, how do we not have those spaces? Because there's so many other kids that are just like me, you know, young black fellas that are creative, you know, young black fellas that need that creative outlet that's not just sports, you know, because
definitely.
yes, we are good at sports and we excel in sports and we're, you know, but we're such creative people, you know, for thousands of years we've been dancing, we've been singing, we've been painting, we've been, you know, all these things we've been doing for thousands of years. Like, how can we not think of those things to be put in our communities, you know, spaces where we can be creatively free and express ourselves, and, you know, like, so to have this space for me is massive. So yeah, we're about to start to open that 24/7 studios. It's going to be called.
Yeah, beautiful.
And yeah, it's exactly that. It's a space to come in and create and express yourself freely. You know, like be who you want to be. You know, like, I think rap allowed me to be who I want to be. You know, it was very easy for me to kind of at the start go down the gangster rap route, like, bit that I was very influenced by, and I loved gangster rap and all that, and but it wasn't me, you know. But that's what I started rapping about. That's where I first, you know, started learning how to do all that, you know, and eventually it turned into, as I said, like, you know, I found out it was a way for me to get my message across. And once I started being authentically just myself and not trying to fit this image of what a rapper should look like or what a rapper should talk about, you know, it was like I just started speaking about stuff that meant stuff to me. You know, even to this day, I can't write a song unless it means something to me, you know, unless each word makes me tear up, or while I'm writing it, or this song makes me feel moved, you know, something, it needs to mean something for me. And for me, like, that's the biggest thing I want people to learn when making music or creating or having these yarns or these things in the 24/7 studios is be yourself, be authentically yourself, you know. And I just can't wait to see the talents that come out of it.
Absolutely. I think, I think that's why a big part of what's so powerful about what you create is that, you know, like, it feels like it is real hip hop because it is authentic and it's political and it's storytelling, you know, and it gives people an insight into a world that they may not know. I think that's where so much power comes through in the art that you create, bro. And I think you're right. Like, you know, our people in our communities are storytellers and creatives. And I think it's about the access to those spaces to be able to have that opportunity and, you know, to be able to plant something like that in our communities out in Lexo is just, that's a game changer. So I'm so excited to see, the magic that comes out of there and stuff like that as well. And in terms of outside of the studio, I mean, you just got back. Did you just get back from London last week or the week before and did some stuff over there?
About 3 weeks I've been back. Yeah. So I did a bit of a UK tour. Did a show in Austria, in Vienna.
Yeah, wow.
I did a bunch of studio sessions over there as well, and it was really a massive work trip. You know, like I went over there and I tried to get the most that I could out of that London trip, and I was so inspired by, you know, the scene over there. And, you know, I went to the British Museum and there was a Black British music art exhibition on.
Yeah, okay.
And it spoke about the influence of Black British music, not only in the UK but around the world. You know, like, you think of like jungle music, garage and grime, and where all that come from, and, you know, how it was all influence of like mixing sounds together that they grew up with, you know, reggae music and you know, all that different stuff was so inspiring to see. And then to come back, I guess for me now, like, that's my goal, is like, I just want to bring sounds together of like that we know, you know, like that we grew up with, and just merge things together. Because I think I'm moving past of just being a rapper now. I think where I want to make good music. Like I know I make good music, but like I want to make music that's like not just like, all right, has to fit into this certain like hip hop genre or rap genres. Like I just want to make music and bring things together of sounds and stuff that I love. You know, I think I want to be a bit more free with my creativeness, and yeah, I think that's definitely what I got from being in London. I think like, cause I was staying in Dawson too, you know, like down the road from Katie. She's in like close to Dawson, and every time I've been over there twice now, and like I stay close to her, and you know, she shows us around, you know, because you know, like she does all my creative stuff, you know, she does all like, you know, the cover art stuff and Father's Eyes, like, you know, like music videos, all those things. Is like, she's so creative, and she's so amazing at what she does, and like, you know, like she brings so much of my vision to life, you know, so much. And it's like a lot of the times it's stuff where like I'm thinking about it a bit, and then she'll come out with just like this plan. I'm like, how, like, are you, it's like, are you in my head? You know, she just like, I think she understands me so well. And like, yeah, just like the being over there with her and the stuff, like she took me to that, you know, British Black music place, the museum and stuff like that just opened my mind up, you know, and yeah, coming back here, like that's definitely the stuff that I'm gonna start implementing more in my music. Yeah.
Yes. I know you got a pretty staunch team around you, you know, which is critical to the success of any artist.
Yeah, Mama Mards is like a powerhouse, you know?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, big shout out to Mards, big shout out to Katie. Yeah. I've known Katie since I was like 12 years old. She probably told you. Yeah. But, you know, she grew up, you know, in Glebe, and so she has a real insight into the reality of, you know, our lived experience. And so that I'm sure can translate to her ability to be able to go, okay, what's this lad's vision that he's talking about? And be able to translate that into something like you were talking to.
Yeah, 100%.
She's got that insight. So new EP's dropping. Can you tell us a little bit about it? Is there anything you want to let out? Yeah, what can we expect?
Chapter 26. That's the name of the EP.
Yeah, nice.
You know, like I'm 26 now. So this is the 26th chapter in my life. And for me, there's another thing that it was Katie, but Lee. Katie's partner, Lee. So he actually come up with the name Chapter 26, and because we're sitting there and we're thinking like, what can we name this? And Lee's another person that, you know, knows me well, and you know, obviously like being with Katie and being along on this journey with me as well. And Chapter 26 for me is like, you know, like obviously being a storyteller and stuff like that, and this chapter in my life, so much has happened, you know, and in the EP I really speak about so much, and all of it was written in this 26th chapter in my life. I think one song was the only one that I was 25 but I was turning 26, you know, in that year, you know, so it's very much, you know, written in the 26th chapter. So, you know, Father's Eyes is in there, Statistic. So they're kind of like set the EP up, and then I go into, you know, I dive more into fatherhood and, you know, where I'm at in fatherhood now, and I, you know, speak about my relationship and with my partner, and, you know, growing the family. I speak about you know, like where I'm at in my music, in my career at the moment, and being very conscious of the time that I spend, and, you know, so there's a lot of different, like, you know, places where I'm at right now in my life, that I really wanted to, you know, like each song just sets up the next. And like, it wasn't even really like I wrote this, like, all right, I've got to set up the last song that I wrote. It was just really just about me doing what I do and speak about what I speak about, and each song just sounds like it's just set the next one up, you know, because I'm just being honest about my life, and I'm just speaking about stuff again that just means so much to me, you know. And from Statistic, it speaks about me being like, you know, a young, like 10 years old, and, you know, like it speaks about that journey then to fatherhood, and then, you know, to where I'm at now. So yeah, it's really a journey of my life, and at this part of my life. So I'm super excited and super proud of this project. You know, this project's very different to my last project as well, you know, because with Gratitude Over Pity, my first project that I put out, you know, super proud of that one too. But for me, that was kind of like just putting a lot of songs that I'd written over like 5 years and just, all right, let's put the best ones together.
Yep.
This one, it's like there's really a storyline, and it's really consistent, and there's really like from start to finish, I take you on a journey through my life.
Yeah. Wow.
So yeah, I'm really proud and really excited to get this one out there.
Yeah, it sounds special. I think that's what many people talk about, right? When they talk about a powerful EP or album, is the ability to be taken on a journey and for that to flow. And it sounds like something special's brewing, bro. I can't wait to hear it. I actually did a lecture at the law school around the topic was the criminalisation of Aboriginal young people, and I just played statistic and then like just played the track, and then asked, you know, the 100+ people in the audience to talk about what they learnt listening to that track around what some of the challenges are for Aboriginal young people in this country.
Yeah, sick.
And so yeah, like credit, you pretty much taught that class, just so you know, like you should have got a royalty from that lecture, I think.
I actually just became a casual lecturer at UNSW.
Oh, neat. Yeah, nice.
Yeah. So I did a lecture there last year.
Yep.
About to do another one during NAIDOC week, but yeah, they asked me to signed it up to like, so now I'm like, yeah, a uni lecturer.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
That's the thing though. They asked me to prepare for that class, and I was trying to put all this, you know, information about statistics and, you know, all this stuff about it, and I just was sitting there thinking like you're like pieces of work like Statistic and others that you've produced, you know, stuff like artists like Barker and that have produced, communicate this issue so much more clearly and so much more powerfully. Like literally the statistics that you cite, I'm sitting there going like, fuck, this is like an academic like learning resource, you know, as a track. But I think like, yeah, like you, I think it's funny, like she's like sort of jokingly like, yeah, I'm a lecturer now at uni, but like I think the actual reality is though, brother, is that you have all this knowledge and wisdom, and I think a big part of the first part of this journey has been about thinking that that message is just communicated through one platform or audience, but I think the reality is that the power of your message, storytelling, the impact of your voice is that most of that stuff can transgress across all these places. And so to see you recognized as a lecturer academically in those spaces to communicate all this knowledge is just a testament to your ability to do just that. Like, to hear that, it's just like, I'm so glad to hear, because we need more people like yourself that have lived experience, but not just lived experience, the ability to also translate that into expertise. So to really not just say like, this was my experience, but to really understand the broader experience of our communities, what we experience culturally, what we've experienced from systems and from state, you know, from the colony and from state violence, and how all this impacts what it's like for us as people. And I think your ability to do that is just so powerful, whether it's through music, whether it's through lecturing. And I just think like, wow, what an exciting sort of space to be in at the end of chapter 26 to see what the future looks like, you know. And I just want to thank you so much for making the time to sit down for this yarn. I'd love to get you back on because I feel like there was a few other things that I wanted to talk about with you that we didn't get to touch on. But hopefully, you know, we took it, you know, pretty sort of deep around some of those challenges around those earlier years of your journey. And hopefully I feel like people that are listening, whether they're policymakers, whether they're social workers or service developers, or whether they're people from our communities that might be resonating with some of your story, can take some really valuable sort of advice that you've been able to share as well from that experience. But overall, brother, I just want to say thank you so much. And
I appreciate it, brother.
Privileged to know you and watch you go from strength to strength. And I think, you know, like, all this stuff is amazing. You know, the accolades, the overseas tours, the impact that you've had through your music and everything in between. But I think ultimately strip all that away and just to see the father that you are and the love that you have for your babies, I think is the most powerful of things and impact that you're having on the world. So
I appreciate that, brother. I just want to say as well, like, I've been so inspired by you as a father as well, you know. Our first podcast that we did, it made me want to just do another whole episode of just on fatherhood, you know, because I feel like you're someone that's just as passionate about being a dad as I am. So always love having those conversations with you too, brother. It's inspiring. Yeah,
absolutely. And maybe, you know, maybe our next episode when we find some time, because I know you're a busy man, but maybe we can just do a deep dive into fatherhood and pick up off some of that original potty we did, because I think you're right. There's plenty that we can talk about, and plenty that I think our communities and other men would love to be hearing about too.
For sure.
All right, bro.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate it.
Don't forget to like and subscribe. Now.
Sick.
All right.